In this segment, we're going to be discussing kind of Labour's historic win, what it means, and I guess how they got it and what I think they need to do potentially. But it is a bit hard to dissect, yeah, in some ways because of the numbers. But I'll do my best to kind of figure this one out. Um, so in terms of when we look at what Labour's majority is, they won about 412 seats, giving them a huge majority of historic proportions. The Conservatives on 121, they've lost 251 seats. The Lib Dems have gained significant seats. The SNP have lost a lot of seats in Sinn Féin, becoming the largest party in Northern Ireland, but they don't take up their seats for ideological reasons. And so when we look at the other numbers here, the breakdown of it, when you look at the vote share, Labour won around 34% of the vote share and won 63% of the seats, which shows you how broken kind of first past the post is. Especially with the Reform Party doing so well. I'm not saying I endorse the Reform Party, but they are one of the main factors in why Labour has won as many seats as it has done with the low voter percentage it has done. We'll be discussing turnout in a moment as well, but we look at Reform UK winning 14% of the vote, which is ominous. The exit polls did have them slightly overinflated. I think the exit polls thought they were on about 17. But of course, people can lie on the exit polls. You got the Lib Dems winning 12% vote share, 11% of the seats, so that's pretty good. Efficiency-wise, Greens 7% vote share, 1% of the votes. And so that is a product of first past the post, really. When we look at the turnout, a very low turnout, which was to be expected. Some people tried to gas it by saying like, oh, people were in the queues and whatever. But when you've got two guys who are very disliked in Starmer and Sunak, it was always going to be a low turnout. Very two risless people. No charisma between the two of them. To be honest with you, there's a reason why there was low turnout. People hate them. Genuinely, people do not like either of them. I've seen this tweet from No Justice, which is quite good. She says, one thing I think will confound seat predictions is just how efficient the Labour vote is going to be. Disaffected leftists will vote against them in safe seats, yet swing voters elsewhere, plus Reform vote splits will give them unprecedented wins, tactical voting everywhere. And this is really great analysis, to be honest, from No Justice. Lib Dems to sweep the southwest. All of this stuff has happened. The Labour. The key phrase when people are discussing Labour and the election is efficiency, which is true. When you look at the turnout back in 2019, it was 67%. It's much higher than it was in my brain's melting 2024. So that's what I mean. Two risless people. This video might be a bit disjointed in the way I've got all these tabs. You can see like there's a lot of them. Shoaib Khan saying interesting points on vote share. Labour's vote share is currently the lowest ever to win a majority. For Labour, 2024, 33.9% vote share equals huge landslide. 2019, 32.1% vote share equals 31.1% of seats. 2017, 40% vote share equals around 40% of seat share. And what it tells you is, especially under first past the post, the most important thing is get your voters out, because you'll always have a shot at most seats when you're the bigger parties, because there's not always a guarantee the other big party's going to get their voters out, which they didn't. I don't think a lot of them turned up, and I think a decent chunk of them voted Reform, and that's what split the vote and gave Labour the wins that it did on this level. And you want to listen to the GOAT, Sir John Curtis?
But for the rise of the Labour Party in Scotland, which has been truly spectacular, we will be reporting that basically Labour's vote has not changed from what it was in 2019. In Wales, it's actually down, and England, it is barely changed.
And so what happened was Labour really held on to most of the votes. The SNP vote did collapse in certain seats. I think Labour gained a little bit in certain areas with more kind of unionist voters voting for them. But in terms of the vote share, it didn't go up much. Labour landslide is a huge achievement, given that with around under 10 million votes, according to Shoaib Khan, he thinks about 20% of eligible voters voted for Labour, and so they've got this huge majority. Curtis with some more great takes. So we covered this one already. He had another one where he was talking about how people weren't really voting for Labour, they were voting against the Conservatives, and there are a lot of polls that do bear that out, which we'll be discussing. The most disproportionate election in British history, in pie chart form, is kind of nuts when you look at it in this way. And, you know, like I said, efficiency, Goodall talking about efficiency, Rachel Cunliffe, who we'll be talking about in a minute, saying, you know, Labour winning this scale of majority with a relatively modest vote share is a sign of success, not failure. We can have a conversation about voting reform, but to underplay that achievement is both bitter and ridiculous. I think it's not really, when you think about it, like, yeah, you can argue Labour played the game well, but the game is incredibly flawed, and I think that's something worth discussing. You know, there is, under a decent democratic system, this should not be possible. And so the system is a problem. Yes, you can argue Labour played it very well, which is fine. And Goodall, in a different tweet, does talk about that. You can say Labour played the game well and first the past the post is incredibly broken. These are 2 points you can make, and they are not mutually exclusive. But one of the few positives is this absolute melon lost his seat. Jonathan Ashworth decided to wage war against not just Bengalis, but people from the Indian subcontinent. And being that his seat was, I think it was South Leicester, clearly did not realise who he was representing, or at least who lived in his constituency.
We're processing people's claims, and those people who shouldn't be here, when they come from countries like Bangladesh or wherever, we're going to send them back.
But why would...
Oof. You know, bro was, you know, I made this joke about 2-3 times now, I'll make it again. You know, this guy wanted to support people from this country. He's deported himself from the House of Parliament. Well done, Ashworth, mate. Your campaign is broken, burnt to cinders, to ash. Faisal Shaheen, who we'll be discussing more in a few minutes, saying, back in October when I complained that Labour was undermining core support because of its Gaza position, I was told that people would forget by the time it came to general election. Labour loses 4 seats to pro-Palestinian candidates. So, you know, Labour have lost people that they wanted to keep on. They almost lost Wes Streeting as well. They almost lost Wes Streeting and a few others because of Labour's brain-dead takes on Gaza, and also the way they've come out and attacked the Bengali community. And this is the footage of Ashworth losing his seat.
Labour Party, 13,760. Sokat Hussein Adam, commonly known as Adam Sokat. Independent, 14,000.
It's embarrassing losing to an independent when you have the party machine behind you, when you were in the shadow cabinet. That's embarrassing. But like I said, you know, this is what happens when you wage a culture war against your own constituents. It doesn't pan out well for you. So I'm glad this clown has gone. Absolutely glad he's gone. And, you know, one of the big subplots, as, you know, Goodall kind of talks about, I don't like religious groups being talked about this way, but he talks about how, you know, in constituencies with big Muslim populations, I think Labour struggled to an extent. There are issues that need addressing, and you know, Labour tried to pivot away when they initially, you know, said really abhorrent things about the situation in Gaza and what Israel is and isn't allowed to do. Labour tried to come back and try and placate those communities, but they didn't do a good job of it at all. People could see straight through what was going on. He attacked the Bengali community, didn't actually offer an apology, which is something I covered. And I've noticed on my analytics as well, that video was shared a lot on WhatsApp, which tells you that this kind of news does spread very fast. And, you know, Grace Blakely talking about, we are now governed by a group of politicians who have spent their entire careers fighting the left, but now they have to govern. They don't have any answers to the problems that drove support for the left to begin with, which is true. Now they have to figure things out. And, you know, this is Faisal Shaheen talking about the seat she was running in.
I'm going to be so disappointed to have Ian Duncan Smith all over again, and be disappointed knowing that we could have won if it hadn't been for the lies, if it hadn't been for what Labour Party did.
And, you know, the Labour Party deselected her, and she had every right to run in that seat. Every right. This is the constituency she was born in. This is the one she's lived in, I think, the vast majority of her life. And she was the candidate, but the Labour Party deselected her based on ideological grounds. It wasn't based on what she said. You know, the Labour Party claimed it was anti-Semitism, right? And if that was the case, when she liked those tweets or whatever happened, they should have deselected her at the time. This was a campaign against a specific person, because when you had other Labour MPs make anti-Semitic remarks, which they did, there was minimal punishment for that. So this was very much an ideological campaign. You know, you got Ian Dunt blaming Faisal Shaheen, saying she kept Ian Duncan Smith in his seat, so congrats on that. When, as Ash Sarkar points out, yes, it's Faisal's fault that Labour purging a popular local candidate at the last minute turned out badly for the party, especially when she got almost as many votes as that Labour candidate. She didn't have the machine behind her, and yet she did almost as well. It's just rotten behaviour, and this is the truth of it here in this clip. They admit it.
Maybe we can hang on to hear what he's
got to say in a minute. George, you want to jump in?
Well, he wasn't here because the Labour Party
Sorry, the audio is quiet.
deposed its candidate, he thought was too left-wing. She stood, Faiza Shaheen, and she got 12,000 votes, and she completely split the Labour vote.
She didn't split the Labour vote. The Labour vote split itself. That's what happened. You know, he says it here. She was too far left. That's why they deselected her. It was on ideological grounds. This so-called broad church is not very broad when it comes to people of the left. They're the reason that the architect of austerity, of poverty in this country, is in Parliament. Well done, the Labour Party, for that one. Congratulations. And, you know, this from the newsagents saying it as well.
You know, the polls are saying I'm going to lose. I don't think I am. And I kind of thought, are you just whistling to keep your spirits up? And then I went to a community library that he had helped establish. And the support for him there from people who had previously been Labour voters actually was really impressive. And the split in the Labour vote, you know...
Sent him on his way.
You know, the decision...
They're talking about Duncan Smith there.
The very last minute for Keir Starmer or the NEC to say, right, you're not a candidate to Faiza Shaheen, has cost them.
There's no doubt that if they'd left Faiza Shaheen in place, that she would have won the seat on the basis of every other result we're seeing across the country. So that bit of party brinksmanship has cost the Labour Party a seat in Parliament.
And they've let the architect of poverty come in, so they can't blame her. You know, I've seen people blame Faiza Shaheen for this. Nah, it was the party machine that did this. It was you guys who kept saying back Labour no matter what and didn't question the decisions they made. You guys did this. Do not blame her for this when it was you guys, clearly. And when you want to talk about why people voted for Labour, and this is important here, this is the real important stuff. 48% to get the Tories out. 13% the country needs to change. 5% of people saying I agree with their policies. So it's very clear that Labour won because of hatred of the Conservative Party. And you know what's going to happen in 5 years' time? Some people are going to forget how bad the Conservatives were, and they're going to look at Labour's record. And when you look at some of the stuff Labour have said regarding the two-child cap, regarding the fact that there's no money and blah, 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 they're not going to get much done. This idea that they're going to get the highest sustained growth in the G7, combined with their fiscal rules, completely untenable. You know, they're claiming that they're going to do PFI 2.0. They're going to let BlackRock invest. That stuff comes at a cost. Do you think BlackRock aren't going to want a return on investment? PFI was a complete disaster. And I've seen, like I said, I've seen pro-Labour people back PFI. It's just wild to me how kind of stupid some people are when it comes to the party that they like. When it's
my team, enemy team.
Their brain goes completely numb. My team versus the enemy team. I just don't get it. You know, Corbyn won his seat despite what people have said.
He's found the argument that Jeremy Corbyn is such a prominent local figure that he would be able to mount a strong independent campaign. That has never really chimed with my experience living in the constituency. He certainly wasn't.
Maybe you're hanging out with the wrong people then, because he won. He won by a decent amount of votes. So clearly he's popular in the constituency, especially when the Labour Party put some goon who makes money from private healthcare as his opponent. It just shows you, though, some of these people are so out of touch. These so-called journalists and media pundits are so out of touch. It's wild that they would think a guy like Jonathan Ashworth can get away with saying what he had said, and then they're trying to claim Corbyn isn't that popular in his constituency. Madness. This is the part. This is the main bit here. This is the part with the bite. This is about Nigel Farage. This is the one I fear, because as we said, Starmer isn't that popular. He won with a very small vote majority in a low turnout election, and I think Farage will be the guy who wins from this if Labour do not deliver on growth, because people will see it as, we tried the Conservative Party, they failed, we tried the Labour Party, they didn't get much done, who's next? Because I think voters are more willing to shop around now. Party loyalty, this idea that you vote for a party for your whole life, is dying.
I'm already speaking to Labour people who are saying that they are taking this as a message very clearly, that they are going to have to do something on immigration, and quickly. I mean, we're talking... It's very...
I wonder who's pushed that. You know, I wonder whose tune they're dancing to when it comes to immigration. Is it Nigel Farage?
Tempting to talk about reform and the threat that they pose to the Conservative Party, or the changes in the alchemy of politics they make to the Conservative Party. Of course, in one sense, that is irrelevant now, because the Conservative Party have never been less relevant. And what matters is what reform does to the Labour Party. And they are going to be, I mean, I think it's almost certain from the figures that we're looking at, they're going to be second in clutches of Labour seats, and that changes the cycle.
Which is true, that has happened.
Psychology of Labour Party thinking. And even if Yvette Cooper doesn't lose her seat, there is the folk memory, you don't have to go back very far, back to 2019, where we all know that the Labour Party came within a hair's breadth of not only becoming very close to being wiped out, but being wiped out entirely in its old northern heartland. And that fear is still so close. So the idea that if it doesn't happen to the Conservative Party, that it could happen to Reform, I think that is exactly the question as to how Starmer performs. Because, as you say, he has made great play about being a great administrator, a technocrat. We've talked before about the idea.
One of the things people in England don't like is technocrats, and they're kind of boring politicians. They like people, I think, with charisma, with a bit of energy, and that's something Starmer doesn't have. Politics is about perception at the end of the day.
They're perhaps the Labour campaign, it's been a great election campaign in the sense, clearly, they've won. But has it been a good campaign for government?
Politically
Speaking, what are the arguments they've been making? What are the dividing lines they've tried to draw? They've actually not... pretty unusually, not attempted to do so. And the problem with that is that when you have someone like Farage, who is extremely sure of what he thinks about everything, and is extremely clear about what he thinks about everything, if you yourself don't appear to be so, then don't be surprised if he drags you onto terrain you don't like. And that will include things like immigration, integration, territory the Labour Party does not.
What we will see is if Labour do not fix up some of the major problems in this country, like the NHS, like the schools, and things like that, all you'll see is Nigel Farage come in and say, look, the reason why we have these problems is immigration. And the problem Labour are going to run into is if they cut immigration, the economy will suffer for it because we need people to come in. So there is the Labour own a bind that they put themselves in by kowtowing this line on immigration, by saying, net immigration is too high. So Labour have kind of put themselves in a double bind, as one of my old teachers would say. And so if they cut immigration, the economy is going to stutter. They're not going to be able to get things like waiting lists down. They're not going to be able to build houses because we don't have the expertise here. But if they allow immigration to go up, Nigel Farage will pounce on that and say, look, they're pro-immigration. They're the reason you can't have nice things in your life. Because that's what right-wing populists love to do. Blame immigrants for everything. Labour have they've messed up some of this stuff, I'll be honest.
Well, we saw Rishi Sunak. We saw a feisty Rishi Sunak do that in the last head-to-head debate, didn't we?
Indeed so. And
Rishi Sunak is no Nigel Farage.
And we should say, I mean, this is a phenomenon that is happening all over Europe. I mean, if we look at this poll, the numbers at the moment, we see a 131 for the Conservatives. You can see, and of course it's dangerous to draw too many parallels, but you can see the potential of Keir Starmer looking a little bit like Emmanuel Macron, being the unlikely midwife of the death of the centre-right in their respective countries, and the midwife of something of a radical right populism which takes its place. The question is, how does Keir Starmer respond to that? And is he able, through the powers of...
It's got to be through the economy. He's got to physically make people's lives better. Goodall's analysis here is really, really on point. Sometimes I question some of the stuff he says, especially on Twitter, but when it comes to his news analysis, when it comes to numbers and things like that, he's very good at it. Because if you want to look at a potential of what the UK is going to look like in a couple of years, go look at Germany and France, because you have the far right on the rise there, because the centrist parties failed on things like the economy. They failed to improve people's lives, and they ceded so much rhetoric to the far right. This is what I'm saying. Like, it's very dangerous what's going on here.
Persuasion and communication to be that defender of liberal democracy, if you like, that you could argue the country is going to need or look to in the years ahead.
So this is, phenomenal analysis there from Goodall, honestly. The one positive I've got from this is someone's put this beautiful Tobey Maguire meme up saying, Farage saying, tell me the truth, I'm ready to hear it. As an MP, you have to declare your financial interest, so that should be interesting. To see if anything does pop up there. And someone saying, if Reform hadn't run, would the Tories have gotten towards a hung parliament, or would they have a much smaller majority? I think that is true. I think it's Reform that have kind of done the damage on the Tories rather than just Labour, because Labour's vote share hasn't really gotten up that much. And Curtis, he said that this is an election where the Conservatives lost rather than Labour won, and so Labour have to do something big here. This, to me, is the most cowardly statement I've heard anyone who claims they're a media kind of analyst say.
I don't know that you can turn this country back to a place that we can be fully proud of unless you take on the media. I don't know if Starmer's got the appetite for it. We've had a lot of fun with Unhinged headline over the last few weeks. I don't know what happens to that. What do the Telegraph weirdos start writing about now? I suspect they'll find a way to continue to be unhinged. But
I mean, that nothing changed. They've always been that.
can you fix the country? Well, such significant swathes of the media, print and, of course, increasingly broadcast, are dedicated to poison, are dedicated to...
There is no excuse. You cannot blame print media, especially when print media is dying. There is no excuse. When you have a majority as big as Starmer has, no one's going to care what people are writing in the Telegraph. At the end of the day, you've got a big majority. People voted, against the Conservatives, yes, but you're the ones in charge now. You're the ones who made big promises. And if you don't improve people's lives, you're going to get blamed. You can't blame the Telegraph or the Sun or any of these newspapers. This is monumental excuse making on the highest level before a ball has even been kicked. Honestly, this shows you these people are so brain dead. They kept saying, vote for Labour, they'll fix everything. Now it's about what's it called, expectation management. Now it's all I don't know if Labour can do it because the Telegraph and the Times are going to write mean articles, and I don't think Labour want that. What's this man? This guy's crazy, honestly. I'm glad NJ clowned this guy on Twitter. I'm glad she clowned O'Brien on Twitter because he absolutely deserves it.
Lies into the ears and the eyes of the great British public. This week alone, the nonsense about Keir Starmer's Friday night dinner and the nonsense about inheritance tax.
Do you know what's crazy about the Friday night dinners thing where Starmer said he wanted to make time for Friday night dinner? The British public actually backed him on that. The British public said, yeah, you should have family time. So even that, they're trying to print nonsense. It doesn't work.
Prove that they don't care about... I don't think they know what the truth is anymore. And if journalism sets the tone for the national conversation, then any attempt by a Prime Minister to restore faith and trust in politics is going to have to involve some form of robust response to the liars, cheat.
And, the Labour Party ruled out media reform. And again, this is no excuse. When you have a majority as big as you do, you can't make an excuse about the media. You genuinely can't. This is a guy who relentlessly went after Corbyn, sometimes justifiably, sometimes not. You can't blame the media for that kind of stuff. You have to understand the situation you're in, which is the media will never be on your side because they're controlled by rich people who want tax cuts for themselves. They want to get rid of things like inheritance tax for themselves. That's why they invest in papers, media, because they want to influence people. So making excuses for Labour off the bat is one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen. James, mate, if you want a job with the Labour Party, just apply for it, honestly. Some of these journalists and these analysts are just embarrassing themselves. If you want a job with the party, just apply. Wes Streeting almost lost his seat, which would have been glorious to see. We would have been smoking that. Whoops, that's the wrong one. We would have been smoking that Wes pack. But he won by, I think it's around 500 votes, which is unfortunate because I think the person who ran against him, I think her name's pronounced Leanne Mohammed, I think she would have done a very good job. She seems like a good, genuine person. And going back to the Reform Party, they've come second in 98 seats. And so it does show you that they are going to be a consistent thorn, I think, in the side of the Conservative Party and also potentially the Labour Party as well. Farage saying he's going to target the Labour Party relentlessly, and like I said, he's going to push that kind of right-wing populism. We'll see how effective it is. Starmer's plans for the first 100 days in government, stuff around NATO, which no one really cares about, planning reform blitz, which getting houses built and starting that off would be good, but again, there's nothing really for social housing and things like that. Push for private investment, which again, you're gonna not bankrupt the country, you're gonna impoverish the country so that investors can make money. Because the way they're going to deliver results is by PFI hospitals and PFI schools and all this kind of stuff. When we've discussed how bad the PFI situation was in the past, how much of a disaster it is, the fact that we're still dealing with these contracts now, 14 years after the Labour Party went, so 15, 20 years after some of these contracts were signed. Lifting a ban on onshore wind, I think this is great. You need to find a way to combat the NIMBYs. And Sue Gray has 20 bills for the King's Speech. It just depends on what those 20 bills are. But they said they would get the ball rolling straight away, and I think they kind of have done. It's just some of this stuff is pretty mid and pretty poor. And this is the thing I was mentioning earlier. Goodall saying two things can be true at once. Labour played the game extremely well for once. They won in the right places. It was a huge success, which is true. Also, you can point to huge numbers of marginal constituencies and a low turnout and say latter in particular is worrying for democracy overall and require political skill from Starmer to address. And the idea that people keep saying, we need to push for proportional representation, right? When you look at the results, 36% giving you a stonking majority, in what world is that an incentive to do proportional representation? because I've been saying this for a while. I think when it comes to the two major parties, they would rather have all of the power some of the time than some of the power all of the time. Honestly, this from Sky News' Conway.
According to the exit poll, and I should say all of this is what the exit
obviously, we've seen this stuff play out.
Poll is suggesting. It does have an excellent record, but we do need to see whether it's borne out by the results that we get in constituency after constituency. But everything suggests people were out there essentially voting in constituencies around the country against the Conservative Party. And that question of how much support Labour have, well, looking at the share of the vote, OK, looking at the implied share of the vote from what we know from the exit poll, it implies a share of the vote that's lower than Jeremy Corbyn received.
And that's what happened. People voted against the Conservative Party. So what happens in 5 years' time? People vote against the Labour Party. What position does that put you in there? Because like I said, party loyalty is dying, in my opinion. And this from Ridge, if the left, she says, I use that term loosely, starts to get organised in terms of tactical voting, this could be significant in terms of this election, but also future elections, which I agree with. We could see in certain seats where the Greens can do more, like they took out one in Bristol Central. You might see the Greens get more prominent. Potentially the Lib Dems could end up backing Green candidates in order to get rid of certain Labour candidates that aren't doing well. Because at the end of the day, what do Lib Dem voters and some Green voters want? To rejoin the EU. The irony is the people who push the single market nonsense, this idea we can rejoin the single market, have really poisoned the well for Labour, because not only is it impossible, but given the fact that Labour have talked about immigration being too high, they've made freedom of movement more toxic. So what that tells you, and I guarantee there are people in this country who would happily be poorer if it meant there was less immigration, right? They made freedom of movement toxic because of the fact that the way people are talking about high immigration right now. So that makes us joining the EU less likely. And so all you're going to do is the Lib Dem voters and some Labour voters who voted tactically or want to back the Labour Party anyways, they're going to keep asking people, why can't we join the single market? And people like Graham and people, other people in the Labour Social who push the single market nonsense, the idea we can just join the single market, they're going to face relentless questioning as to why we haven't done so, because they kept making promises we could do so. And what is that going to do? It's going to make tactical voting a less of a thing potentially in the future for the Labour Party, because of the fact that people want certain policies and they're not going to get them via Labour, so they're going to look for other parties that can offer them. This was a very situational election in terms of people hate the Conservative Party, people are voting against the Conservative Party, and Labour were the best placed to win that. So what happens when you're the established party now, you're the ones in power, and in 5 to 10 years' time people hate you? What do you think is going to happen? This is why he needs to deliver, because I fear a far-right Reform UK party. I fear that more than most things, to be honest with you. That is one of the things that can keep you awake at night. Like I said, Rachel Reeves saying there's not a huge amount of money. So here we go when it comes to expectation management, because in reality, this is what happens when it comes to things like power, as the great original General Shepherd said.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Boundaries shift, new players step in, but power always finds a place to rest its head.
And, power's found a place to rest its head in the Labour Party and Sir Keir Starmer. So the question is, what's he going to do with it? And if he doesn't deliver, like I said, I am nervous. I'm so nervous about reform. We're already seeing it speed run in Europe, in Germany, in France. We're probably going to see it in the UK, let's be honest. The so-called Big Three, the two countries are speed running it ahead of us. If Labour do not deliver and make it so people's lives improve, you will see people move more towards the far right. There is in some people in England inbuilt xenophobia, where they hate immigrants, they hate foreigners. So one of the reasons why they got Brexit over the line, probably the key reason they got Brexit over the line, and that's not changed too much. Reform UK are still doing marginally okay with younger voters. There are more progressive voters in the younger age brackets now. But Reform UK will have a go at trying to convince those people that the reason that they don't have good prospects in life is immigration. And I guarantee that will work on more people than you expect. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.